You may recall that when I started reading in the book of Psalms, I made an introduction explaining that because we don't know when the Psalms were written, I would be interspersing them throughout the time period between the reign of King Saul and the time of Solomon. Now we are coming to other, what is called wisdom literature. This is going to be the book of Proverbs. And once again, we do not know exactly when these were written. However, sticking with my general rule that we just let the Bible tell us what it is, most of them were written during the time of Solomon. Most of them were written by Solomon. Even in the book, was it in Kings or Chronicles that it talked about Solomon writing a couple thousand Proverbs. Now, because we know that the majority of them were written during the reign of Solomon, I am placing them all during the reign of Solomon. But rather than interspersing them as I did the Psalms, we are going to do the book of Proverbs in sections. Now, before we do this, though, let us flip back again to the Bible Dictionary, because the Bible Dictionary has a lot of really good information. And right here, let's find it again. And right here, we have this written regarding the book of Proverbs. It says, the Hebrew word rendered proverb is mashal, meaning a similitude or parable, but the book contains many maxims and sayings not properly so called, and also connected poems of considerable length. In other words, it's called Proverbs, but it's actually a collection, and what might be said, a collection of collections. Some of them are proverbs, some of them are poetry, some of them are just instructions, like what we might consider college lectures. But they're all just given the general title of proverb. And I like this too. I do like this whole thing. I'm going to read this whole thing. There is much in it that does not rise above the plane of worldly wisdom, but throughout it is taken for granted that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The least spiritual of the Proverbs are valuable as reminding us that the voice of divine inspiration does not disdain to utter homely truths. I like that. God wants to help us in all aspects of our lives. And even for those who are not seeking heaven, are not following the covenant path, He is still there to inspire them, to help them in their lives as they have chosen to live them. The first section, being chapters 1 through 9, is the most poetic and contains an exposition of true wisdom. Chapters 10 through 24 contain a collection of proverbs and sentences about the right and wrong ways of living. Chapters 25 through 29 contain the Proverbs of Solomon that the man of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied out. Chapters 30 and 31 contain the burden of Agur and Lemuel, the latter including a picture of the ideal wife, arranged in acrostic form. 4 divisions. Now, there are some scholars who want to give us 6 divisions. I think the 4 is sufficient. So each of these divisions, chapters 1 through 9, starts off with these are the Proverbs of Solomon. And we get these 9. And these are given, as they said, it's more poetic, it's more flowing style. It's not short, simple statements of wisdom, which is what a proverb would normally be. The second section, chapters 10 through 24, again states these are the Proverbs of Solomon. And these are much more in line with the short, simple statements of wise counsel. And then chapters 25 through 29, which apparently were compiled during the reign of Hezekiah. They took sayings of Solomon that were in different books and unified them into one complete collection. And that's chapters 25 through 29. But again, they were written by Solomon. They were just compiled by Hezekiah. And so they were still written during the time of Solomon, so we will still read them in the time of Solomon. The last 2, chapters 30 and 31, we don't know who Agur or who Lemuel was. Some people think Lemuel is just another name for Solomon. Agur, we just don't really know who these people were. This is the only reference we have to them in the Bible. Some people think that they were students of Solomon. But whoever they were, it doesn't really matter. We don't know when they lived or when they were writing, so we're just going to include them in the same time period. But like I said, instead of interspersing these throughout, like I did with Psalms, we're going to read each of these sections of Proverbs together. So right now, my next videos will be chapters 1 through 9 of Proverbs. I will then return to the histories of 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles. I believe after we read about the dedication of the temple, we will return and read the next section of Proverbs, being chapters 10 through 24. At the end of Solomon's life before his death, but at the end, I think after chapter 10 of 1 Kings, we will read the rest of the Proverbs. So this is how we will proceed with the Proverbs. Now, I did mention that some scholars divide this into 6 sections, and I want to point this out. Is that the second section, chapters 10 through 25 to 24, it opens it up saying these are the Proverbs of Solomon. But somewhere in chapter 22, I believe verse 17, it says the sayings of the wise. And then in chapter 24, I believe verse 23, somewhere in there, it again says these are more sayings of the wise. And some people, some scholars, want to put these as 2 separate sections, saying they're not being attributed to Solomon, they're being attributed to as the sayings of the wise. Not necessarily not necessarily wrong, but couldn't the wise one be Solomon? I mean, I don't know if that is a good division. I like the 3 basic divisions that we have with chapters 30 and 31 being an appendices to this thing. These are the Proverbs of Solomon. These are some good wise sayings from some of his students. I think that's a better way of dividing it, and I think it's probably more accurate to how it was originally written. Now, the other thing is, a lot of scholars will say that these were not written until much later. So like the first section, chapters 1 through 9, is said to have been written like in the 600 BC, like 400 years after Solomon. The third, I believe it is, the ones that Hezekiah compiled. No, it is the second one, chapters 10 through 22, according to them, was written in the 2nd century, so after all this stuff. And they claim it was based on Egyptian writings. And, I mean, there is some similarity, from what I can tell, between these Proverbs and the Egyptians and the Babylonians and all the other guys. The Greeks had their own wisdom writings. So there's some similarity there. But they say the Proverbs is based on this Egyptian writing. And I think it's more likely that the Egyptians wrote based on Proverbs. That Proverbs was written back in the time of Solomon, the 200 BC one, it would be written like 700 years before. And the Egyptians were writing based off of the Jews. There's a tendency among scholars, which I find very annoying, quite honestly, to never let the Bible be original. They don't like it when the Bible has an original idea. It is always that the Bible has to be based on some pagan writing before it. So they do the same thing with like the story of Genesis and the flood. It can't be that the Babylonians based their myth on the Bible, on the truth, and that the Babylonians have a corrupted version of what really happened. No, it has to be that the later Jews took the Babylonian myth and incorporated it into the Bible. They can't seem to handle the idea that the Bible is the original, and all these other guys are being influenced by the Bible. And the book of Proverbs, I think, is no different. They just don't, they see a similarity between Proverbs and something written by the Egyptians in the 2nd century, and immediately their assumption is that the Jews copied the Egyptians. But they never consider that the Egyptians copied the Jews. Anyways, I'm rambling again. I'm going to leave that here, and in our next, it'll take, I think, 2 days to read the first 9 chapters of Proverbs. So we'll see you in there.